a minute. Ready to go?
Yeah.
Good evening, fellow Toastmasters, distinguished, well, not so guest. So, as you know, the title of my speech is going to be Will America Decline? I did this speech in order to give a perspective to people after the election. You know, it's more or less people are in doomsday thinking that the country's going to go downhill. So this is just a perspective from a layman who's read a little bit of history, maybe to give you a perspective to think about. As you know, there's America's ominous future. So many analysts in the media foresee that America is a declining world power. Right? So we look at the three factors to play into this prognosis. So you have national debt, you have $36 trillion. How are we going to pay it off? We're going bankrupt. You know, we have political instability. We have the Trump assassinations. We have the July 6th Capitol riots. We have the riots with George Floyd. Everything seems haywire. We have a low birth rate. We have millennials such as myself who are just delaying giving birth and having children. We have decay of morals and values. People just don't care about family anymore. It's all about them. Hyper-individualism, right? And then we have crumbling institutions. We have churches. We have schools, universities. They're all closing down. So it seems like the world is just going in topsy-turvy. America's going down. We're declining as a world power. All is lost. There's no hope. Therefore, we have no future. Right? Right? Not so fast. Okay? America's going through a transitional period to a new economic and political age. So America goes through a new transitional period every 40 to 50 years. America will come out of this phase stronger and more resilient.
Excellent.
Good news.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So there's three transitional periods that I wanted to cover. There's more, but limited time, I'm just going to cover these three. So there's age one. This is from 1877 to 1929. Age two is 1929 to 1980. Age three is where we're presently on, 1980 to 2028. That's just the estimation dates that I give. So the age one is the industrialization age. Okay, so there's Rutherford B. Hayes. He was the 18th president of the United States. He enacted the greatest industrial revolution when he replaced the gold-silver standard of Andrew Jackson's 1830s era, and he had the gold standard to fight the Civil War inflation. At the time, we had a lot of inflation. We had to get rid of the silver metal in order to control it, and we were able to do so. In doing that, in 1890, we replaced Great Britain as the greatest economy in the world, and then we became the largest credit in the world by 1960. So all looks pretty good. So there was political instability that happened. So America's industrial output became too imbalanced, which means that there's too many rich people and too little rich people and many, many poor people. So we saw massive inequality between the rich and the poor. So we saw Carnegie, Rockefeller, Morgan, they all had billions of dollars while people had very little working in the factories, making them rich. So then we had radical political movements that were rampant. So we had the socialists, the anarchists, the Marxists. They were all trying to clamor for power to try to take down this evil regime called this capitalist nation, America, making people poor. We had multiple assassinations. So we had James A. Garfield was assassinated in 1882. We had William McKinley in 1901 by anarchists. Then we had Theodore Roosevelt was attempted assassination in 1912. Wow. So we had quite a bit of political upheaval at that time. This led to the Great Depression. As we know that the U.S. stock market declined in 1929. This led to the U.S. GDP contracting by 30% between 1929 and 1933. Worldwide GDP declined by 15% in that same period. So this crash spawned all these different movements, radical movements in Europe. So we have Hitler in Germany, Mussolini in Italy, and Francisco Franco in Spain. So, and obviously it led to World War II and the destruction that followed from that. So we go to age two, right? Age two, America becomes the most powerful country in the world. America accounted for 50% of the world's GDP. That is unheard of, probably will never happen again. So what happened also, and this is very key, is that the Bretton Woods Conference effectively made America the world's bank. So what we see is the U.S. Reserve currency was made from this agreement, where You have the US as the world reserve currency, but it's redeemable in gold. And that, I'll explain that in the next slide. Okay, so we go into political instability. So with the emergence of Western Europe and Japan's economies after World War II, America's economy struggled. So before we had a dollar shortage, meaning there weren't a lot of dollars in circulation in the world economy. But in the 60s, there's plenty of dollars in circulation. So this led to economic problems because it was harder for US manufacturers to produce goods at cheap prices with so many dollars in circulation. So there's outsourcing of jobs to various countries, which led to a lot of economic problems in America, led to recessions, it led to inflation, it led to a whole host of issues. During this time of economic problems, we saw numerous assassinations. We saw JFK get assassinated in '63. We saw Malcolm X in '65, MLK in '68, RFK in '68. And also we saw the period of stagflation. So in protest to the US assisting Israel in the Yom Kippur War of '73, the OPEC countries led by King Faisal of Saudi Arabia imposed an oil embargo to the US and other Western countries in that same year. So what you see here is you have gas shortages where you literally have to wait in line to try to get gas because there wasn't enough gas to go around. The US experienced stagflation. So stagflation is you had high unemployment and then you also have high inflation at the same time, which was thought unheard of, but it was pretty much seen during this period. But we went through a transitional period in the 80s with Reagan. What Reagan saw is that the policies that we tried to enact to get over these economic problems did not work. We were trying to use Keynesian policies, just the fancy economics word. We were trying to get people to spend money. The problem wasn't spending money. The problem was we didn't have enough supply to sell to people. So Reagan said, well, we're going to have this supply side economics idea where we're going to have lower the taxes for rich people, rich companies, in order to create more jobs. And we're going to lower taxes for people to consume, to spend money to make the economy be vibrant in the household sector, and then for innovation, for people to make new technology, Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, to start innovating for the economy so that we can transition away from industrial goods. And that's certainly what happened during Reagan's era. So from 1993 to 2001, we were able to grow exponentially in the tech sector under Clinton with Reagan's idea of tax reduction. So, however, we see political instability once again. So the cost of living started to elevate sharply after 2001. We started seeing a lot of foreign capital going into the housing sector. So we saw a bunch of rich people from Taiwan, China, Singapore, Hong Kong, Brazil as well. They were coming into America, spending lots of money to buy real estate, to buy homes, to buy stock, and that's what made the property values go up quite a bit during this period. We also saw that the tech sector grew rapidly in the 2010s. So Obama started passing policies to try to get these tech companies to grow, but he neglected the working class, where he didn't allow the working class to have their jobs revamped from the overseas job markets that China was taking these jobs from. So we started seeing that the working class Americans, as you probably know, felt left out. They felt, well, what about us? We see a bunch of rich people in the tech sector making lots of money, yet we're struggling to keep jobs and survive. And what we saw is Donald Trump became president in response to a lot of the Washington elite neglecting the working class. So as you see, rent is too damn high, maybe Donald Trump is too expensive.
Remember that?
Yeah. And this leads us to the crash. This leads us to the economic problem. So we saw that the housing market crashed in December of 07 due to poor regulation by the government. The government just pretty much had a hands-off approach saying you can do what you have to do as long as you can go ahead and make these loans go and the economy is booming, that's fine. And then you had risky lenders saying, well, okay, we know you can't afford the home, we know your credit's a bit shaky, but you know what, you're good for business, you're gonna give me a high commission, I'm gonna give you a loan anyway. Obviously, this led to the Great Recession, and has led to deflation, meaning that prices went down because people weren't spending their money. People didn't have money to spend, so prices were going down as a result. So the Federal Reserve responded by slashing these interest rates to near zero because they were desperate to get people to spend money. They said, we have to make sure the economy is revamped by getting people to spend money, so we're going to incentivize them by slashing interest rates. However, we saw a rebound of inflation with the pandemic, and then the Fed had to raise the interest rates even more. So we see economic instability was the cause a lot of times with the political instability. So what can we conclude from this? We can conclude that America's political instability is determined by America's economic status. So America's economic periods usually last 40 to 50 years, as deterioration is usually seen through political and social tension, right? The problems such as the national debt, political instability, low birth rate, decay of morals and values, and crumbling institutions are symptoms of the period's deterioration and the beginning of the new age, and they will be solved in the new age. Therefore, America will overcome its present difficulties and become a stronger nation. Any questions?
So as we're gonna see the gas prices go down and inflation will go down with that?
So with inflation, it has more to do with people spending lots and lots of money now. It used to be that we had a shortage of resources early on, but then now it's just people just aren't spending so much money that the Fed has to raise these interest rates. However, they're lowering these interest rates because spending is starting to slow down, inflation is going down, but still, we still have inflation pretty high for that reason. Yes.
Today, on the way back home from work around 6:30, I heard the NPR news talking about the people spending in this season already started before the Black Friday. Because some people are talking about this year, the price looks like is very reasonable and acceptable compared to the last 2 years. And then they are talking about, looks like the price wise is already back to 2018 to 19. So they feel like, looks like the economy, the inflation is slowly, gradually going down. How do you think about that?
So the inflation has been going down, let's say, for the last 3 months or so. The Fed last week just lowered their interest rate by a quarter, by 25 basis points. So we're starting to see the gradual effects of inflation reducing, and it's going back to pre-pandemic levels, but it's still at a very high price point for consumers. Prices are still high. So we haven't overcome inflation quite yet, but for the most part, we're getting over that hill. So.
But talking about the dollar wise, now looks like the US dollars is getting stronger and stronger. Today, even when people are talking about the US dollar and all the people over the world come over here to try get more US dollars for exchange to invest here because the return rate is higher and also the value is stronger.
Yeah, the US dollar is, so this is what you see in economics is that when the US dollar is very strong, that tells you that more and more people are putting their money into the market.
Yeah.
But it also says that other countries are struggling immensely as well. So we see it in China, we see it in Japan, that the yen and the yuan are struggling a lot.
Right.
So that means that the dollar adversely has to be very strong. That's not good for the long term because we don't want China and Japan to be struggling as they are. We want to give them a little bit more strength, and we want the dollar to go down in value in order for the cost of living to also go down in value, because it's more expensive for consumers to have a very, very strong dollar compared to other currencies.
But the thing is, Americans want to, of course, we all want America to be stronger again. How about the other countries? You want the world to be peace, then everybody should have at least affordable, sustainable life for that.
The problem also is that when you look at the situation like Japan and China, it's hard for these countries to change their economic position for structural reasons. So America has every incentive to try to make sure that Japan and China do not fall too low. And they don't want the dollar to be as strong as it is. So it's hard for investors to say, okay, we're not gonna invest in the US dollar, we're gonna invest in the Chinese yuan, when China is struggling economically and hasn't shown investors that it's a worthwhile investment. So it's a lot of there's a lot of moving parts to that, so.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Do you think foreign countries having such a direct line to our citizens will affect our country's stability being tied to the financial timeline?
Can you explain your question a little bit more?
Yeah, like for example, before you couldn't control what your citizens heard from other countries, but now misinformation is being provided to all of our citizens to divide us. Do you think this is enough of an effort to separate the health of our country from being tied to the economic cycle?
Yeah, I believe that misinformation is rampant. It's been rampant for a long time.
Fake news you're talking about?
Yeah.
Fake news. We see China and Russia are having deliberate ploys to try to give misinformation to voters. We've seen it with Russia using ploys in the social media and YouTube. That's always going to be at play. I think that's just a part of the system, the climate that we're in, because of the economic conditions that we have, because there's a vast amount of wealth in the top 1%, and the bottom, let's say 50 to 99% of people do not have as much wealth. So we do see a lot of political instability for that reason, and they're more or less just exploiting that. But once the economy gets better, you'll start to see less of it, because people won't really be up in arms about their lives.
Yeah, that's reasonable.
I got two questions. The first question is, so everyone, there's a shortage in the housing market. And one of the biggest reasons is that everyone's, such a low interest rate right now. So, one, how do you see the housing market balancing out, correcting itself? And two, is the only recourse another natural disaster or great recession or depression to reset everything? Because how are we gonna get the supply back if the only way I see the supply coming back is if there's another natural disaster or catastrophe that forces unemployment high, which will force people out of their homes. They'll lose their homes, and the supply will come back. I don't see any other way supply is gonna come back.
I believe that the homes crisis, this is just my opinion, I'm just a layman, you take it for what it is, but I believe that a lot of the analysis that I read in the news is a bit incomplete about the housing shortages. I think it has more to do with macroeconomics and micro. What I mean by that is, they're looking at it as supply demand. There's not enough houses for a vast amount of people, but I think it has more to do with what's going on overseas. What's going on with Taiwan, China, Singapore, all these people with vast amounts of resources are coming into the market and marking up the prices for ordinary consumers. So it's crowding out all these other first-time home buyers who don't have the money to compete in that market. So what has to happen is there has to be Congress has to come in and more or less.
Is there any data to back that up? Because what's the difference between the rich 1%, the 1% investing in the housing, is the 1% taking up the housing supply? How's that any different?
Well, it's just when you have capital coming from overseas, and these are like industrialists from China, from Taiwan. I'm running out of time, so we're gonna have to stop there. Thank you.